The miracle in our universe. All of the life forms known to mankind exist nowhere but here, our home planet, the Earth. Our dream of conquering space has come true. The International Space Station, ISS, the largest technological project ever undertaken. People have been living in this outpost of humankind without interruption since the year 2000. So far, more than 100 astronauts have lived, worked, and researched here under unique conditions.
What fascinated me was most of it the beauty of the planet Earth. It's a beautiful planet, fantastic colors. The Bahamas are beautiful, the Australian outback, Tibet, you have really very nice places. But it also is fragile. If you look beside the planet, you see the blackness of space and this thin atmosphere. You feel that it is vulnerable. Fragile.
What fascinates me about space travel is that it's the frontier, the final frontier we face as human beings, and it's out there waiting for us. We don't know what's beyond it. I feel the way people probably used to feel when they stood on the beach and looked out at the ocean and asked themselves, what's beyond the horizon?
Alexander Gerst will fly to the ISS in 2014, along with U.S. astronaut Greg Weissman.
All that stuff over here, and then you've got partial pressures.
Because they are essential to life, water and oxygen are precious on board. An ingenious system recycles nearly all of the oxygen on board, and even 85% of the water in urine.
This would just be a standard QD connection on this side.
Alexander Gerst is using this simulator to learn to control a huge robotic arm.
And then delete the camera status, and therefore you.
On the space station, he will perform this task in the cupola, the station's observation tower. From here, it's also possible to watch Soyuz capsules and ATV cargo carriers dock onto the space station. Mission Control. This is the iconic center in the history of American space exploration.
History from the past.
Milt Heflin is an old veteran of NASA. He took part in the Apollo program. The original control room from those days is an almost sacred site for him.
We have entered the cathedral of human spaceflight operations. I hope you can feel the cathedral. Yeah. Oh, this is, absolutely. When I come in this room, I've worked in this room as a flight controller and a flight director. And I mean, you're in the room where we landed on the moon for the very first time, July 20th, 1969. And all the landings that took place were controlled from mission control right here in this room. Let me tell you about the American flag that hangs over here in the corner. It has been to the moon and back. It flew to the moon on the command service module, stayed in the command service module in lunar orbit, stayed there.
Apollo 17.
Right? Apollo 17, and then and brought back here and hung in mission control.
I think when you enter this room as a young astronaut, you immediately get goosebumps, because it's really the closest place on Earth to the moon landing. Just imagining that all the stories I've known since I was little took place right here in this room, and of course also in a spaceship, that's a fantastic experience.
What's so special about this room? It all has to do with the people. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's a matter of the camaraderie and the family feeling and the teamwork. That's a word that, I mean, it really happens in this room. I mean, people in this room want to succeed. It shows you that when you have the support and the dedication and the commitment, you can do almost anything you set your mind to. And that's what I enjoy about being in mission control. Apollo 13, which had probably
My grandfather was a ham radio operator with a little room in the basement where there was always equipment humming, all kinds of radios and antennas and buttons and knobs. When I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, I was fascinated by it. One day, I think I was about 6, he somehow managed to focus the antenna on the moon and send radio waves that reflected off the surface of the moon and returned to his antenna, all the way back to the Earth. He let me talk into the microphone, and 2.5 seconds later, that's the speed of light and also how long it takes for radio waves to travel there and back, I heard my own voice very distorted on the radio. For me, as a 6-year-old, that was incredible. It was as if a little part of me had been to the moon and back.
Alexander Gerst is training at the same facility where Yuri Gagarin prepared for his historic mission.
This is a place where you can feel how long and strong the Soviet space tradition is. There's a picture or statue of Yuri Gagarin on every corner, and there were actual guards posted at the gate, standing there with machine guns. Now it's a civilian facility. Yeah, you can stroll around and you really feel the old spirit of Soviet space travel. I love that about this place.
Our ESA astronaut is turning into a cosmonaut. The fabric of the spacesuit is simply gathered up and tied with 2 elastic bands. Hard to believe, but that's all it takes to withstand pressure, even in space. Regular training in Moscow is a very important part of Alexander Gerst's preparation. Since the last American space shuttle flight in the autumn of 2011, these Soyuz capsules are the only means anyone has to fly to the International Space Station. The Volkswagen Beetle of space, robust and reliable. That's what they call the Soyuz. It went into orbit for the first time in 1967 and have been launched nearly 140 times since then.
Today we practiced on the life support systems. One of them is the spacesuit I'm wearing now. You have to know how to use it, how to test it to ensure it's airtight, and what to do, for example, in case the pressure drops in the space station unexpectedly. Then, to protect against the danger of fire, you have to release all oxygen from the space capsule immediately. In fact, the decompression is even faster than what would happen in the case of a leak. It's a complex system. And when you're wearing a spacesuit, your body is under pressure, and you have to work under pressure, which isn't easy, and that's what we practice today. You can definitely tell the difference between the 2 training systems between Russia and the USA. My training program here in Russia is very structured, divided into 2 unvarying intervals. That's because it was just developed that way here many years ago. All the training programs for the space station. And because they were so successful, they stuck with them. In America, they like to keep everything a little more flexible. They often add new classes that have been developed recently, and old ones are cancelled. But ultimately, I believe what's important is what they have in common. And that is, both countries have really shown that they're very skilled at space travel, and they know how to train astronauts and do so very successfully.
It only takes 90 minutes to orbit the Earth. Every day they are on board, the astronauts experience 16 sunrises and sunsets. The International Space Station has proved that countries that were enemies for most of the previous century can cooperate successfully. The International Space Station is the fulfillment of an ancient dream of mankind, to leave the planet to explore the unknown. Our European astronauts are trained at the European Astronaut Center in Cologne. Alexander Gerst was selected from a pool of more than 8,400 candidates. ESA is not looking for daredevils, but professionals who are able to keep their cool even in extreme situations, and who are able to work in diverse scientific disciplines.
All in all, it's a big science kit we can use to construct all kinds of experiments we want to conduct in a highly sterile environment. What you see up here, these 2 optical modules, are a particular experiment investigating the diffusion of liquids under weightless conditions.
This centrifuge can create artificial gravity 5 times as strong as that on Earth. Alexander Gerst loves challenging himself to the extreme. Before he became an astronaut, he was a geophysicist who studied volcanoes. He worked on volcanoes in New Zealand and the Antarctic. The faster it turns, the more Alexander Gerst has the feeling he's standing straight. The researchers hope to create artificial gravity that will allow future astronauts to engage in physical fitness training in space.
You can certainly feel the blood traveling down.
It is hoped that someday in the future, it will be possible to better cope with the side effects of weightlessness. The ATV is an unmanned space transporter. ATV brings cargo to space and is piloted remotely. In case of an emergency, the astronauts on board need to be able to intervene in the docking procedure. It's always a tricky situation when spaceships dock onto the ISS. Maximum precautions are taken to ensure against a leak and prevent catastrophe. The ATV is Europe's biggest contribution to the International Space Station.
To understand the significance of the European Space Agency, you really just have to take a close look at the space station. 1/3 of the station's habitable modules were built in Europe. The space station relies on the European Space Transporter ATV, which prevents it from falling by always pushing it into a higher orbit, and brings supplies. We have a powerful booster rocket that's internationally renowned, the Ariane. And there's a European on board the space station about half the time. You can really tell that the Russian Space Agency and the American NASA see ESA as an international partner, and they really count on the ESA.
At NASA headquarters in Houston, Texas, Alexander Gerst is training in the world's largest indoor swimming pool. It holds 23.5 million liters of water and is more than 12 meters deep. In the pool is a life-size replica of the entire space station. Together with his American colleague, Alexander Gerst is getting ready for his first mission outside the space station. Later, the real thing will be very similar, but much more dangerous.
Of course, we know that a lot can go wrong. We've seen it in the past, and that's why our training program lasts so long. We have to be able to deal with all kinds of situations. We train procedures for many different emergencies, for anything that could happen. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. And that's how we prevent ourselves from feeling we've lost control in case of an actual emergency. Because that's the feeling that causes people to be afraid, when we feel that we're no longer in control of a situation. And the long training program, tries to avoid just that.
For 6 hours without a break, Alexander Gerst practices under simulated weightless conditions. Later in space, the missions outside the station will take just as long. Divers are on hand for the astronauts' safety. The training session is observed from a control center that also gives the 2 astronauts instructions. It's a unique place to work. Nowhere else is it possible to so perfectly simulate weightless conditions and practice performing tasks on the space station's exterior.
From there, and that way I know I have a good indication when I'm working too hard. So if I get up into the 40s, for me personally, I'll be working too hard. Now your number may be 45 or whatever.
Part of the training involves unexpected problems that require the astronauts to improvise and come up with solutions.
Okay, the image uses the bad boys to sit up top here to my port side, correct? That's correct. All right, you're going to be doing the port 1. All right, looking for what
EVA, extravehicular activity, is the official term for a spacewalk, a mission outside the space station. Later in space, the success or failure of these EVAs will be critical for the operation of the space station and the safety of the astronauts. They have to repair damage on their own or replace defective modules. Today, the instructors have planned a dangerous challenge for Alexander Gerst. NASA colleague Clayton Anderson receives instructions that Alexander Gerst cannot hear. The commands are issued by the control center.
My guess is you will see the RGMCs.
Yeah, I know.
They'll go a little past that.
The simulated emergency is a sudden loss of consciousness. Alexander Gerst has no idea what is happening. Clayton Anderson isn't reacting. That means mortal danger. Alexander Gerst must act quickly. The unconscious astronaut must be brought back into the space station as soon as possible. He only has a few moments' time, and if this were a real mission in space, it would mean the difference between life and death. After 6 hours, the training session is over.
Basically, it's like running a marathon the whole time. And when you're doing exercises like incapacitated crew member, where your colleague is unconscious and you have to get him back to the airlock as fast as possible, it really pushes your limits. I can tell, my hands, my muscles are exhausted, and basically it's like that every time I take off the suit.
A training facility outside of Moscow. Practice for another kind of emergency. Alexander Gerst commutes constantly between Houston, Cologne, and Moscow, preparing for his mission in May 2014. Together with his Russian and American colleagues, he is practicing a splashdown in the Soyuz capsule. This training program used to be carried out under realistic conditions in the Black Sea. But in light of budget cuts, some improvisation is now required to simulate waves. The astronauts spend several hours in the cramped, hot capsule.
Ideally, of course, you touch down on the landing pad in the plains of Kazakhstan, and that's usually what happens, a pinpoint landing there. But of course, you have to be prepared for emergencies. For example, there might be a leak in an oxygen tank or fuel tank while you're in space. And then you have to immediately return to the Earth's atmosphere. And that means you might end up just about anywhere on the planet between 52 degrees north and 52 degrees south. And that might also be in the water. And that's what we have to be prepared for.
It's an adventure that Alexander Gerst is still looking forward to.
For me, one of the primary motivations for wanting to fly to space was this curiosity I have. I want to find things out, not just new technologies and new scientific discoveries, which in my view would by themselves be sufficient to justify space travel, but also this other feeling of going beyond borders, to see what's in our Earth's neighborhood. We've been venturing into space for 50 years. When you think about it, how much we've achieved in those 50 years. We've been to the moon and other heavenly bodies. We have a space station in orbit above the Earth where we can live, research, work. We human beings are such a curious and inquisitive species. We won't ever stop looking for answers. Of that, I'm certain.